The Archdiocese of Chicago is a vibrant and diverse faith community. We celebrate our faith through worship, evangelization, and reaching out to the needy. Welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for watching and listening to our program here today. My name is Bob Gilligan, and I'm the director of the Catholic Conference of Illinois, the public policy arm of the Catholic bishops in our state. There's a lot going on right now in Springfield. There's a lot going on across the country, and so our office is mainly responsible for following those issues and trying to advocate on behalf of the bishops across the state to enact better public policy, not only here in Illinois, but all across the country. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to have two guests on this morning to talk about national issues, really, per se. And then I'm going to bring it back home here to Springfield at the final portion of the program. We're going to talk about some pending issues at the state capitol. There is less than 3 weeks to go in the General Assembly, and there's a lot going on. So we'll have a lot to talk about, a lot to review here at the final portion of our program. But before we do that, we're going to go with two national issues that have been in the news lately. One of them regards the legalization of marijuana, which unfortunately took place here in Illinois a couple years ago. But nevertheless, even though it's legal in Illinois, there's a lot going on across the country. And recently, there's been a decision made to recategorize marijuana from Schedule 3 to a Schedule 1 drug. And we're going to bring on our first guest here in a second to talk about that. Then after that, discussion about marijuana and the update on it. We're going to switch to another national issue. A Supreme Court decision, not a Supreme Court decision, but a Supreme Court case was recently heard. It was regarding something called EMTALA, and it's a long acronym. It stands for Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. And basically what it has to do is what type of services is an individual entitled to when they show up at a hospital in an unannounced situation. This has ramifications for all across the country. It pertains to an Idaho law as to the effect of EMTALA, and the reason we're talking about it is that we have a concern because Illinois has a very strong Illinois Healthcare Right of Conscience Act. And so there's a constant vigilance that our office has on that state law and to try to protect doctors, nurses, and all medical professionals from having to do something against their conscience. So we'll bring in our second guest, John Bursch, from Alliance Defending Freedom to discuss that case and the potential impacts of it. So let's do this. Without further ado, let's talk about our first subject. As I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to talk a little bit about marijuana legalization and some national developments that occurred lately. And to help us unpack what's gone on, we're going to bring in Luke Niforatos. I knew I was going to screw that up. Luke Niforatos, and we're going to help with his pronunciation of his name.
You're close. You were very close.
Very close. Luke, thanks for taking some time this morning and joining us. And I know that you're coming to us from Denver, Colorado. But SAM, the organization you work with, let's talk a little bit about SAM and just reintroduce anybody listening to this. What is SAM and what is your function as you guys are currently engaged?
Great. And Bob, thank you for having me on over the years. It's great to see you and be on the show again. And very thankful to the work of your organization. You're doing great work there in Illinois. So my organization is SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, and we are the nation's top nonpartisan, nonprofit policy organization working on marijuana policy from the perspective of public health and safety. So we have a science advisory board of researchers and scientists from basically every Ivy institution. They are award-winning researchers on marijuana. They lead all of our work. They review all of our materials and talking points. We put the cutting-edge science first when it comes to marijuana. And so our perspective is that legalization and commercialization of marijuana, because that's what legalization leads to, is commercialization, is a harm and a detriment to society, to our families. It increases addictions and other social harms. And so we oppose legalization. We work to oppose legalization in Illinois. But once a state makes that choice to legalize it, then we work to try to pare down the industry, put stricter regulations. And so that's kind of what we do.
It's a great organization, and thank you so much for your work, because we really rely on the information coming out of SAM to help our advocacy efforts here. Look, I want to talk a little bit about the change recently that has been recommended. It has not been adopted yet, if I understand it correctly. Talk us through a little bit about what happened recently when the Biden administration announced a change of the categorization of marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug, and what does that mean?
Yeah. So let me give you a little background. So in 1970, Congress passed and President Nixon signed the Controlled Substances Act. We established a drug scheduling system of Schedules 1 through 5, Schedule 1 being the most restrictive and Schedule 5 being the least. And what happened was the test for Schedule 1 is whether a drug has high potential for abuse, as well as whether or not it has accepted medical value, currently accepted medical use. So those are the two tests for whether it goes into Schedule 1 or not. Schedule 1 meaning has high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use. That's where marijuana has been for a number of decades. In 2016, the Obama administration initialized this same scheduling review, and they arrived at the conclusion based on the science that marijuana should remain Schedule 1 because it's becoming actually more addictive, the science is telling us, as well as the FDA has not approved marijuana in terms of the whole plant for smoking, for example, as medicine. And just for the record, that will never happen. Science has never approved smoking your medicine, so that's never going to happen. Now we have the Biden administration, just 8 years after the Obama administration concluded marijuana should stay in Schedule 1. The Biden administration has proposed, this is a notice of proposed rulemaking, so there's going to be time for comment and a lot of discussion. They are proposing it go to Schedule 3, which would mean that it has a lower potential for abuse and some currently accepted medical use. Even though the science says that's not true, that's what they're proposing. And so what this would look like in effect, if it were to go through, is that marijuana would remain illegal, which from my perspective of my organization is a good thing. However, it would grant the marijuana industry a tax exemption for all of their business expenses. So advertising, the industry's been using Girl Scout cookies flavors and candies, advertising products to kids. They would be able to write all of that off on their taxes, saving hundreds of millions of dollars. So from our perspective, that is a very big concern. You're talking about big time upscaling of the commercial model here. In Illinois, we've seen the industry already pushing younger demographics to get addicted to their products. They're going to get rewarded for that financially. And that's really all that's going to come out of this decision. So it's kind of a little bit of a nothing burger, but it does grant the industry a lot of money, and we think that's very concerning.
Luke, I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal this weekend, but on Saturday there was an in-depth interview with, I think her name is Bertha Madras, and she is a scientist, and she has been studying marijuana for years, and she comes at it from the perspective of what does the impact of using marijuana have on brain matter and from a scientific perspective. And I think she's quoted in there something saying along, as I'm paraphrasing, like she believed this decision was politically motivated, not scientifically justifiable. Talk a little bit, there's some really scary statistics in that article. I would encourage everybody to take a look at it. It was in Saturday's Wall Street Journal. It was an in-depth sort of profile of, and she's been doing this for a long time, Ms. Madras. I believe she's 81 years old. She's a Harvard-trained expert on this subject, and she talks a little bit about the proliferation of marijuana use, the percentage of people that are using it, and the dangers that it has on the brain. And I don't know if you're equipped to talk about that from kind of a scientific perspective, but anything you could shed on how use of marijuana impacts the brain, and maybe contrast that to a little bit about alcohol, because we often hear like, oh, well, alcohol's legal and this is kind of the same thing. It's not.
Yeah, Dr. Madras is a wonderful woman. She's a longtime friend of mine and a longtime friend of our organization, doing excellent work and truly an expert on this issue. What I would say is she's absolutely right about her concerns as far as its impact on the brain. So we know that today's marijuana, for those of you in Illinois who are seeing the products that are being sold, I live here in Colorado and I see them too, the industry has totally skyrocketed the potency of THC. That is the ingredient that gets you high in the plant. Now we're talking about 99% potent products versus the average joint in the Woodstock days was 2 to 3%. So this is not the same drug that you remember, not the same drug that we've seen even 10 years ago. It is totally transformed. And so this new high potent marijuana has changed the game from a public health perspective in a couple of important ways. First is the impact on our mental health, as Dr. Madras alludes to. We now know that you are 5 times more likely to develop schizophrenia or psychosis if you are regularly using today's high potency marijuana. So higher potency, more mental health risks. We've always known about this linkage with mental health concerns with marijuana, but it's much more extreme now. We're also just saw a study a couple of weeks ago get published from our National Institutes of Health, which found that regular users of today's marijuana are actually more likely to be violent than non-users. So we're beginning to see a lot more research on this, and I think that's going to be really important as we understand it. The other thing that's changed with marijuana as it's become more potent is this addiction issue. So many people believe the myth out there that marijuana is not addictive. Well, actually, a decade ago, the number was 1 in 10 people who tried marijuana in the last year would develop a cannabis use disorder. That is the scientific diagnosis, medical diagnosis for addiction. Now that number is 1 in 3. So the addiction rates are rising, which takes us back to this scheduling discussion where the Biden administration's proposed rule saying marijuana has a lower potential for abuse at a time when the potential for abuse is rising because of this commercial industry and how they have changed this drug fundamentally. So I think that's very concerning. You see the impacts on the brain. So there are a lot of harms that I think we need to consider when we look at the broader use of this substance. And to your question about alcohol, they're two totally different drugs. Every drug impacts you differently. But what we're seeing with marijuana use particularly is this linkage with schizophrenia and psychosis. We're not seeing that in a linkage with alcohol. Yes, alcohol has many other harms, but we're not seeing the mental health concerns at such scale that we're seeing with marijuana. So I think that's one key difference between the substances. What I would also say, though, is this comparison with alcohol is a little bit of a fallacy. People say, well, alcohol is legal and yet it causes all this harm. 100,000 Americans die every year from alcohol, and we have drunk driving issues with alcohol, yet it's legal. So why don't we just do that with marijuana, even though it impairs your ability to drive and it has other harms maybe that some people see as less than alcohol? And to that I would respond, it's kind of like saying, well, my headlight is broken on my car, so let me take a bat and crash the taillights too, just to be consistent. Just because we have one harmful substance that we've made legal in this country doesn't mean that we should add more harmful substances to also be legal in this country. That's a little bit of a fallacy. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I would respond.
It certainly does, and thank you for saying that, because I feel like a broken record. I'll use the headlight example in the future because that's a good analogy. But I've said that many times. Like the logic here, just it doesn't make any sense. And look, alcohol. We're not advocating that we make alcohol illegal. That's probably not a possibility. But as you so rightly pointed out, the social harms of alcohol are significant. And I know it's part of our culture. We get that. But that doesn't mean that we should add to more harms when we don't have to necessarily do that. Going back to the Schedule III issue, I think you rightly pointed out that one of the things that is going to happen is now that the marijuana industry will allow there's an accounting mechanism. It has to do with depreciation, and so in essence, the change, as I understand it, means that the marijuana industry will be more profitable if it's now used as classified as a Schedule III drug. The other thing we've heard is that this will also somehow or another change the ability to do more research about marijuana, but it seems like there's a lot of research going on today. I don't know if you have any comment about the research angle on this moving to Schedule III.
Yeah, the research angle is a good question. That is another topic that's come up with this. So there are people who think that we will have more research on marijuana if we move it to Schedule III. And to your point, we already have tens of thousands of research studies happening on marijuana. In fact, my organization led the authorship and passage of a bill through Congress last year. It was the first bill to be passed by Congress and signed by the president on marijuana in 40 years. It was called the Medical Marijuana Research Act. And we helped with that bill. We sponsored that bill because we want more research to be done. I believe that when you search for truth, you will find truth. And when it comes to drugs, you see that these are not substances you want used by the broader public. You want them strictly kept to a medical setting if used at all. And so we endorsed that legislation. It was passed, signed. That expanded the amount of research that could be done on marijuana. It expanded the amount of research growing that was possible and how many people could grow marijuana for research purposes. So this is a problem that has been solved already through recent legislation, as well as even in Schedule I, we can still study these substances. I mean, don't tell me we have to reschedule fentanyl and heroin and cocaine and all these other substances just in order to be able to research them better. We don't. We have a very good scientific understanding of them, regardless of what schedule they're on. And so what our organization has been saying is, you look at the move from Schedule 1 to 3, we don't believe that by moving marijuana to Schedule 3, there will be any increase in the research done on the drug. We already have a giant amount of research that's happening. There's more coming down the pike. And by the way, the FDA has already approved several marijuana-based medications for prescription use today. There's Marinol, pure THC. There's Epidiolex, which is pure CBD. These are things you can get legally via prescription from your doctor today. And I think just not a lot of people know that. The FDA has taken those drugs through clinical trials. It has reviewed them for safety. That's the way this should go. If there are medical benefits to one of the 500 plus components of the marijuana plant, that's great. We'd love to see that, become a medication, but it needs to go through the FDA protocol, because when you have a for-profit industry that is leading the narrative, they will say whatever they can to get a profit. We saw that with tobacco. Tobacco is invested in marijuana now, and marijuana is acting just like tobacco did. They're telling our veterans that marijuana cures people of PTSD when all of the literature says the opposite. Marijuana makes your PTSD worse. And I'm sure to some of you who are hearing this, that's maybe the first time you're hearing this, but if you go and look up the research is almost unanimous that marijuana exacerbates PTSD symptoms. And yet here we are with such a popular myth. It's very important that science leads this discussion, not profit-hungry corporations, and certainly not the fickle public sentiment, which really has no place in the field of medicine.
I'm wondering, too, with regard to research, that it seems like there's an ample amount of scientific research that you just outlined about the effects, the medical effects, the physiological effects of marijuana usage. That is out there. I am increasingly concerned, though, that we are not seeing sufficient social science research in terms of the impact of legalization, what's having on crime rates, what it's having on the effects of teens, and things like that. That concerns me, because I wonder if that, as you had indicated, that there's so much money now in the system, in the marijuana industry, that what happens, as I've seen, when you get these kinds of social issues, that they wind up funding or setting up organizations to provide grants for research that I would argue sometimes are not exactly empirically related. I'm just wondering, in your work, that anecdotally, it seems to me, since the legalization of marijuana in Illinois, there's been an uptick in crime. Now, I cannot say that there's a cause and effect. We can point to legalization and it's led to a X percentage of whatever it is, homicides, robberies, et cetera. But as you know, the crime problem in Chicago is significant. And I have to say, when we hear stories about some of these crimes that are taking place, some of these brutal shootings that we're seeing, one should wonder, are they under the effect of marijuana at the time of that? And it never seems to be reported or adequately studied. I'm wondering, in your world, are you seeing any of that at all? Because I think that could help change public opinion a little bit if it could be somewhat proven.
It's a great point. And it's actually something I bring up quite a bit, is we need a lot more discussion of the social harms of legalization. Yes, we have the science on it, its physical harms to the user and it's the probabilities of car crashes and things like that. But we're not talking about the impact to quality of life for people. So there's been a few good research studies, one done in 2019 by the University of Colorado, where they looked at the crime, particularly property crime, around communities and neighborhoods that have marijuana stores within them. And what they found was anywhere from a 20 to 1,000% increase in crime, property crime, in the communities that allowed pot shops. I think we need to see a lot more research in that area, because yes, we're not seeing the causal factors exposed here, but just, here's another reference point, in Colorado, we've seen huge increases in property and violent crime over the 10 years that we've had legalization of marijuana. Now, there's a lot of other policies that go into driving those factors. We really need to parse out what are the causal factors, but right. I think, intuitively, I think the public knows that the more people you have high in your community, the more people you have addicted and using drugs, the less safe, the less quality of life your community has. And so I think we need a lot more discussion around that. The other piece that I think is missing is the impact on the family. When you have a primary caregiver, primary breadwinner, a family, parents who are addicted to this drug, who are spending thousands of dollars a month to maintain the addiction to this drug, which so many people in lower income communities particularly are being preyed upon for this to happen, that hurts the family. It then hurts the next generation of kids who, when they grow up, they can tell you they knew when their parent was high. These are effects that we're not talking about, that we absolutely need to have a conversation around, because you take it to the extreme, right? And you were alluding to some of these shootings. There was a veteran who was using marijuana for his PTSD and had a psychotic break, and he shot up a bunch of people at a festival in Washington State a couple of years ago. These are the kinds of examples we're talking about on the extreme side of this, where this can really hurt people, and it can cause other people to hurt more people in our communities. And so I think we need to have a broader national conversation around our drug policy and say, do we really want to let corporations run away with this? Tell us it's normal, fund bogus studies, as you're alluding to, just like tobacco did. The marijuana industry is funding bogus studies in major research institutions. They've got a lot bigger budget. I'll tell you, the public health message of, 1 in 3 people who try marijuana in the last year are going to develop a cannabis use disorder. That's what the National Institutes of Health say. There's no advertising budget behind that message, but there's literally millions of dollars behind the message of marijuana helps with your anxiety, even though it does the opposite. It makes it worse. And that's because of the industry that's behind it and the profit that they derive from that. So we have to think long and hard about these issues, and we need to have more of a national and state level conversation about the real effect of marijuana use and other drug use on families, on communities, and on our safety, which I think is really critically important.
Thank you so much for that information. That's all good information. It reminds me that perhaps, at some point in time in the future, in the past, I've had some representatives of law enforcement on here to talk about what they're seeing, and they'll tell you. They will tell you pretty clearly what they're seeing in the streets and on their day-to-day experiences about the impact of the legalization of marijuana. And perhaps it's about time we bring some of them back on, because they have the on the street view. Luke, thanks so much for joining us. Go over a little bit one more time, the organization and how to find out more about SAM. It's a very good organization, and we rely on your emails and your updates, and go to your website from time to time. And as long as I'm in this position, I'm going to keep talking about this, because I really think this is something that we should not ignore. This is a big social peril that right in our hands, and it's something we could do something about if we had the political will and helping change the culture to help address it. And perhaps we can do that with some of those statistics you announced. Talk a little bit about SAM and the website and how people can get further information.
Yeah, and thank you, Bob. You have been really committed to telling the truth on this for years, and just God bless you for that. I know you have been faithful. So our organizations learnaboutsam.org. Again, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working on marijuana. We're actually working in Illinois too. There's legislation to try to cap the potency of THC, the potency of these marijuana products in Illinois, and so get in touch with us. We're working on that. We'd love to see that legislation pass. It's a big fight with the industry. You can go to our website again, learnaboutsam.org. You can sign up for our emails. Also, you can see there on the homepage, you got marijuana rescheduling website page. It gives you everything you need to know about the rescheduling process, much more in the weeds than pardon the pun, if you will, than what I gave you here over the interview. But you'll get all your questions answered there as well. So again, we have a science advisory board of leading scientists on this issue. And one thing I didn't mention, Bob, is we were actually co-founded. This may surprise some people. We were co-founded by a former senior Obama drug policy advisor, Dr. Kevin Sabat, who I work with, as well as former Congressman Patrick Kennedy from the Kennedy family, the Democratic congressman from Rhode Island. So again, this is a nonpartisan effort, and whether you're Democrat, Independent, Republican, anywhere else, this is an issue that I think is very, it cuts across all the aisles that there may be, and it's about protecting kids, and it's about, really protecting our next generation from the new big tobacco.
I know Mr. Kennedy was just out here for the St. Patrick's Day parade, and I know some people that were talking to him, so that's a really good reference point, that it's a bipartisan issue, and thank for his work, and the name lends a lot of credibility. Luke Niforatos, did I get it better? Right?
You nailed it.
All right. See, practice makes perfect. Thank you for taking some time this morning, and God bless you and your work, and keep it up, because I think you mentioned one point in time in the conversation that you talked about the truth, and eventually the truth will come out.
That's absolutely right, and I think Aquinas would also agree with that. So thank you, Bob. You have a great day.
You got it. You too. Have a great day. Don't go away, everybody. We'll be right back. We're going to take a change here a little bit. We're going to stick to national issues. We're going to talk to John Bursch. He is with Alliance Defending Freedom. He's going to talk to us about the Supreme Court decision on something called EMTALA, and we'll unpack exactly what that means when he comes back. Don't go away.
The cemetery ministry is a core ministry of our Catholic faith tied to the corporal works of mercy. It's comforting to know that our Catholic cemeteries are caring for the remains of our loved ones awaiting the resurrection. There are 44 Archdiocese of Chicago Catholic cemeteries willing to help you in your time of loss. Call 708-449-6100 or visit CatholicCemeteriesChicago.org. Catholic Cemeteries, serving the Catholic community since 1837.
People always say, how can you spend your day with 3-year-olds? Seeing the changes that they go through and just the journey and how they grow, this is a very rewarding job. Even though at the end of the day, we're not the highest paid people on earth. And when I have a parent contact me and say, my child loves school, that to me, I'm setting that foundation for their love of learning, because really you are changing lives, you are molding lives.
Shape the next generation of leaders. Teach. Apply today at archchicago.org/schooljobs.
Catholic Charities' Loss Program was created more than 40 years ago to help survivors of suicide wherever they are in the grieving process. This nationally recognized program continues to offer a safe, non-judgmental environment where survivors of suicide can find community, direction, and resources for healing after suffering the devastating loss of a loved one. Online and in-person services are available for individuals, couples, children, and families of all faith traditions. To learn more, call 312-655-7283 or email loss@catholiccharities.net. Don't suffer alone. We are here to offer loving outreach to survivors of suicide. Contact Catholic Charities today.
I am a seminarian.
The Church needs compassionate and well-trained priests to help guide each of us through life.
What inspires me, what draws me always to the priesthood is continue to see priests be a beacon of hope for other people.
You can play a part in the education of these young men as they prepare for a life of service to others.
I want to be that beacon of hope too, and it sets my heart on fire.
To support our seminarians, make your gift at archchicago.org/seminarian fund or call 312-534-7959.
You're listening to Catholic Chicago. Ahead, the Archdiocese of Chicago brings you programs about the people, events, and issues that touch our lives. Thanks for letting us be part of your morning. Now again, Catholic Chicago.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Bob Gilligan of the Catholic Conference of Illinois, talking about public policy matters all across the country, here in Illinois and nationally as well. We want to take a focus now kind of on a national issue that also has state implications by talking to John Bursch. He is with an organization called Alliance Defending Freedom. That's an excellent organization that has a myriad of attorneys working on various issues of concerns to the church and many secular functions as well. John, thanks for taking some time this morning.
Thank you for having me on your show.
This is great. We want to talk this morning to you about a little bit of, you may shed some light on what may be a controversial case with regarding EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which is my understanding is that basically that's a law that was passed years ago in the 80s, and it says if you're taking Medicare money, if you're a hospital, that you should treat people in emergency situations. And I think now, and you can probably go into more detail than I can, but the concern is that what is treatment and how does that intersect with a recently enacted law in the state of Idaho that would bar most abortions in that state? John, I tell you what I want to get to eventually, is I don't want to forget this point, is that apparently in the conversation at the Supreme Court, there was a conversation that I think was mostly come out from Justices Barrett and Roberts, and it had to do with states with conscientious objections. I want to get to that at some point in time, but first, let's just set up a little bit of EMTALA so people know what EMTALA is and what the Idaho law was.
Sure. As you mentioned, EMTALA had a pretty non-controversial beginning. It was enacted in the 1980s by a bipartisan majority in both houses of Congress. It was signed into law by President Reagan, who's a noted pro-life president. And all it was intended to do was ensure that if an indigent person showed up at the emergency room, they would not be left in critical need of medical care on the sidewalk simply because they couldn't pay or didn't have insurance. There was a common law rule at the time that said hospitals did not have a duty to take care of people who showed up at their doorstep. And so the statute operated that way for nearly 40 years without any trouble. And it doesn't specify what treatments need to be provided. It simply says that the hospital has to provide necessary treatments to stabilize the patient. But everyone always understood that that was built on a state law framework. In other words, states control the practice of medicine, what doctors can and cannot do, whether it comes to opioids, experimental procedures, or drugs, or things of that nature. And so state law would always control what was available to the hospital to provide as a treatment. Well, that all changed after the U.S. Supreme Court decided the Dobbs case, and it returned the question of abortion to the states. At that point, President Biden initially said that although he disagreed with the decision, he understood that the issue of abortion would now be left up to voters in each state or through their legislatures. But then only 2 weeks later, he turned around and said, well, no, actually, this federal EMTALA law creates an abortion mandate in emergency rooms if someone requires an abortion. And so as a test case, the administration sued the state of Idaho. As you mentioned, they have a very strong pro-life law. It protects life beginning at conception. And the only exceptions are to save the life of the mother or for rape or incest. And the administration's position is that EMTALA preempts Idaho's law in the emergency room. So even though Idaho made the political choice not to have abortions in its state, except in those three very narrow situations, the Biden administration says that EMTALA requires abortion in much broader situations. And so that's what set up the conflict at the U.S. Supreme Court.
How did the arguments go, in your opinion? Do you get a sense of where the court is and where they're going to come down on this?
Well, generally, the court seemed pretty sympathetic to Idaho's arguments.
Okay.
You know, the main one being that state law practice of medicine has always been the rule. The federal statutory scheme kind of assumes that that's the case. It's the way that the administrations at the federal level have interpreted EMTALA for 38 years. In fact, the federal government could not point to a single example in all those decades where a local hospital was required to provide a treatment that violated state law, much less an abortion that violated state law. So we felt pretty good about that. Some of the very pro-abortion justices did a lot of grandstanding and asked lots of hypotheticals and really didn't even give the Idaho lawyer much of a chance to respond to those, but just use one example to show how silly that grandstanding is. Justice Sotomayor had a lengthy question and then didn't allow an answer about a woman who showed up at an emergency room who had a premature rupture of membranes. In other words, her water broke early and the baby wasn't viable. And her point was that an abortion would be required in that instance to save the mom from potential infection. But what doctors will tell you is that in a situation like that, abortion is almost never the only option. Another option is to wait and see, to monitor the mom's temperature, her white blood cell count, to make sure that antibiotics are available. And it's possible that the mom, without having any infection, can carry that baby to viability, and then you can save them both. And EMTALA, in addition to not saying anything about abortion, defines an unborn child as a second patient who is entitled to emergency medical treatment. So EMTALA and Idaho law are consistent in that both of them require the protection of mom's life and innocent unborn life. And in that situation, Justice Sotomayor hypothesized about, you could save them both if the doctor treated the baby as a patient instead of simply going right to an abortion. But the other justices didn't seem to be jumping on that bandwagon. And so we're hopeful that the court will uphold Idaho's law.
I wasn't aware of that. In an EMTALA, there's a definition of unborn child, and that there's direction that so what you're saying in some ways, there's actually two patients.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a two-patient statute. And in some places, the unborn child is referenced with regard to a woman who is in active labor. That's the active labor portion of EMTALA. But in another place, it simply defines the unborn child as a patient.
And I, interestingly enough, that's how we approach it too. We've always
Absolutely.
said that.
Yeah, if you're a pro-lifer, you would think about it exactly the same way. And so it's not a surprise to any of us that President Reagan would sign a law like that, or a surprise that for 38 years, no one would ever interpret that statute as requiring the doctor to kill one of the two patients they're supposed to protect.
John, do you want to talk a little bit? So, as I had mentioned, that at my understanding and reading about the case and the SCOTUS blog, et cetera, is there was a conversation at the end, and I think it was primarily from Justices Roberts and Barrett, if I recall correctly. And there was some questioning about, well, what about states that have conscientious objection laws or conscience clauses? You may or may not know that Illinois has, I'm told, one of the stronger healthcare right of conscience acts in the country, albeit we did get a little ding there during COVID. We said that, well, you have a conscience right except for when it comes to COVID, but in a strange way, by the time the law took effect, the COVID crisis was over, so I'm not sure what to make of that, whether we get a win or a loss in that category. But anyway, I digress. But we do have a strong conscience act. So depending on the court rules, if it comes down on the side of the state of Idaho, do you think there will be a move in states with strong conscience clauses to weaken them?
Well, it was an interesting exchange at the court because in the past, this presidential administration has taken the position that EMTALA overrides all conscience protections at the federal and the state level. Oh. And in fact, at Alliance Defending Freedom, we had a separate lawsuit that started in Texas that we won in the Fifth Circuit on behalf of pro-life doctors to resist that very point. But in March, at the argument about the FDA abortion pill safety restrictions and whether those should stay in place or not, the government admitted for the first time, the federal government, that individual doctors had conscience rights in the hospital that state and federal law covered. And at this EMTALA argument, the government's representative, the Solicitor General, conceded that hospitals have that religious liberty protection too. And so we weren't expecting either of those concessions. It shows how the government felt that those must have been necessary in order to win its case, although that's not locked into a regulation or anything anywhere. That's just their representations at court. But it does kind of prove our point that laws outside of EMTALA itself govern what happens during the treatment. And that if a state does have a religious liberty protection, that will override any necessary treatment language in EMTALA itself, because that's the regulation of the state practice of medicine. Now, as for whether states will start to pull back on the state protections of religious liberty rights for doctors, it's been happening, and I'm afraid that it's going to continue happening. That in the abortion space after Roe in the 1970s, pretty much everybody agreed at the federal and the state level that no one should be forced to engage in a procedure that violated their deeply held religious beliefs. And that's not the United States that we're living in anymore in 2024. Now, not only do pro-choicers shout their abortions, but they want to compel pro-life doctors and nurses and PAs to participate in abortions against their conscience. And so it's great that Illinois has that law. I'm familiar with it. It's shocking that it's still in place because you see those types of protections being eroded in states across the country. And it just shows what a huge attack there is generally on religion, but specifically on the Catholic Church in the United States, that the progressives are willing to force pro-life Catholic doctors to perform abortions. It's really horrific. That's not the country that we used to have.
It is not, and it's funny because I look back in the legislative record sometimes, and I read that, and I look at who voted for that law, and there was a Democratic majority at the time that voted for that, and many Democrats supported that for the very reasons you just outlined, that they might be publicly and personally okay or support abortion, but they did recognize that there's a difference between forcing an individual to do it who does not support it. And that was sort of the accepted value, the thinking at the time. As you've indicated, that is not the case where we are today in Illinois. You know who our governor is. You know we have supermajority Democrats. And unfortunately, in the Democratic Party anymore, at least in the urban areas, it's virtually impossible to take even a moderating position on abortion. We've seen in our state laws on requiring parental notification eliminated, and very few Democrats who said, yes, I support parental notification, faced strong electoral challenges, and some of them lost, in part for that issue and others. So you can't even be pro-parental notification for a minor anymore in certain areas of the country, and unfortunately, we're in one of them right here. Going back to EMTALA then, so this decision will come down, is this one of them that'll come down in June, I take it? This is
most likely. The court hears arguments beginning in October through April so that they can get all of their opinions released by the end of June. And the more controversial ones, and anytime it's abortion, that they tend to come out later. But particularly because this case was argued in April, on April 24th, we don't expect it before the last week of June. One other point I wanted to make on the religious liberty issue, it's not just abortion where we're seeing that. At the federal level, there's this Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, that was enacted, I want to say in the 1990s.
Yes.
Because it was signed into law by President Bill Clinton.
Correct.
It passed the U.S. Senate 97-0. It doesn't get any more bipartisan than that. And today, progressive Democrats criticize RFRA as a license to discriminate for churches and religious people. So it's unfortunate, but that's where we are. It
is unfortunate. So you described EMTALA as kind of this innocuous statute, and I myself was aware of it too, as it related to, I always looked at it and I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. No hospital should just leave people at a curb. You should be required to treat them. I think that's common sense. And that's probably what was the thinking going on in the 80s when President Reagan signed it. But were you a little surprised? And I have to say, in getting ready for this interview, I was not aware that it was the Biden administration that started this EMTALA question and taking it to the court, correct? It wasn't the state of Idaho. It was the Biden administration kind of wanted to, it sounds like they wanted to pick this fight.
Absolutely. This was a test case to see if they could enforce an abortion mandate through EMTALA on pro-life states. And they picked Idaho because Idaho is one of a relatively few number of states who not only has a pro-life law that protects life from conception, but also is located in the Ninth Circuit, which tends to be a more liberal circuit that the left favors. And so they picked the fight with Idaho. And Idaho lost in the trial court by a miracle at the Ninth Circuit when they went up and asked for an emergency stay on appeal. They got a conservative panel in the Ninth Circuit, which said, no, EMTALA has never been understood to require abortion. It doesn't even mention abortion. It doesn't do that today. And then the administration went to the en banc Ninth Circuit, where you ask all the judges to rule on it. And the en banc Ninth Circuit overturned that panel ruling without any reasoning whatsoever. It was just a one-sentence order. And so that's kind of what set the stage. It's a little unusual that the U.S. Supreme Court would take a case like this, because typically they wait until there are a broad number of cases across the country and federal courts of appeals are reaching different outcomes on those cases. But here, the issue was just too important, and it affected every state that has any pro-life protection at all. And so they took it immediately, which we viewed as a favorable sign for the outcome.
It's unfortunate. So it looks like, in all likelihood, we'll probably get another decision, late June, and in the midst of a presidential campaign and all that's going on with that, this could lead to more a further ratcheting up of the already very hot debate on the abortion topic, which is not helpful, I think, to the general culture when we get that kind of debate going. We've seen this before, and unfortunately, it looks like we might be facing another one again, but who knows how this case is going to go. John, what else is, I know ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, has got a lot going on right now in a lot of different cases. What else is in your portfolio right now?
About everything that you can imagine. Lots in the gender ideology space, where we're trying to defend the Catholic understanding of human anthropology. You've got boys who are competing against girls in sports and beating them in running races and swimming and things like that. We're defending a lot of Save Women's Sports Acts across the country. You've got parents who are insisting on using puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgery on their minor children because of a gender identity that they express, even though that the science around the world shows that that's not a good outcome for kids. You've got governmental entities that pursue religious organizations and schools because they won't hire employees who violate the church's understanding of the human body and things like that. So lots in that space. And parental rights tie quickly into that too in the public school space, where you have counselors and teachers transitioning students, vulnerable students, many of them on the autism spectrum based on a one-sentence profession of a gender identity. And they keep it a secret from the parents, actively thwarting their ability to raise and nurture their kids. So we see a lot of that. On the abortion front, in addition to these two cases that we had at the U.S. Supreme Court this term, the EMTALA case we've been talking about, but also the abortion pill case, we've also seeing now pregnancy resource centers in some states who are being persecuted by attorneys general's offices, claiming that they are engaged in fraud and misleading consumers because they won't perform abortions, which we know is just kind of ludicrous. And then just a broad variety, as you can imagine, of church prosecution cases where churches are being told that they're going to lose their tax exemptions because of their beliefs on marriage or other things, being told that they have to hire employees that violate the church's teachings and the everyday conduct that they engage in. So, Alliance Defending Freedom is a great organization, the largest public interest law firm in the world that provides pro bono support to churches and religious organizations and to individuals to protect their rights in these contexts. But we're busier than we've ever been, and that shows no sign of slowing down. As the culture continues to kind of teeter towards a more secular culture, a less religious culture, the attacks on religious liberty and on life and on parental rights increase every single day. And so we'd ask for folks for their prayers and their support. If you're interested in learning more about any individual case, you can go to our website, adflegal.org.
John, thanks so much for taking some time this morning. And as you were rattling off that rather lengthy list of issues that you're involved with, I was thinking to myself, click, I've done that one, I'm involved with that one, there's another one. So we're unfortunately, fighting. I'm fighting it in the legislative arena. You're fighting it in the legal arena, and we do the best we can. And if it's any hope, a sign of encouragement, we were able to work with some of your attorneys and some other attorneys here in Illinois on the Deceptive Practices Act of pregnancy centers. And although the bill passed, we won easily in court, and it was largely due to the kind of the teamwork we did with the legal folks in the legislative arena. So as I was joking with some friends, my career has changed now from trying to pass bills, then trying to defeat bills, trying to amend bills. Now I work on legislative intent and on lawsuits. So it is what it is. Yes. And actually I'm working with one of your colleagues on a bill that would add reproductive health decisions to the Illinois Human Rights Act. So we interact with you, Thomas More, and many others frequently. Let's put it like that. John, thanks so much for taking some time this morning. Keep up the good work, and I'm sure we'll be talking again.
I'm sure we will, and please continue to keep doing the work that you're doing, and God bless that effort.
Great. Thank you so much. Don't go away, everybody. I'm going to do a quick rundown on the issues that we're facing here in the final 3 weeks of the legislative session when we come back. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
At Catholic Charities, we want to remind you that we are here for anyone who is a victim of domestic violence or anyone who has a concern about someone they think may be a victim. Domestic violence affects millions of people each year, both women and men, of every race, religion, culture, and economic status. It includes physical, psychological, and emotional abuse, inflicted in both subtle and overt ways. The impact on children can be devastating. If you or someone you know are victims of domestic violence and you are looking for a place for healing and recovery, call us at 773-935-3434 in Cook County and 224-430-4977 in Lake County, A safer, happier tomorrow can begin today.
I can't imagine myself going into any other school.
Our school fosters growth by being a backbone to our family.
My kids are incredibly well-rounded. I see a lot of kindness in them on a daily basis.
One of the things I think Catholic schools do well is personalize the learning experience. You can hear joy in the classrooms.
I feel that I'm happy that I am in this kind of school.
Our school communities provide students with academic excellence and character education in a supportive and stable learning environment. Come see for yourself. Visit archchicago.org/findaschool.
Ancestry and genealogy are more important every day. People all over the world are wanting to learn more about their family heritage for personal and for health reasons. At Catholic Charities, we are hearing from adults who lived for a brief time at St. Vincent's Orphanage, the wonderful life-affirming agency that operated out of our headquarters for 91 years, serving thousands of women, children, and families until it closed in 1972. Our post-adoption services help adults who want to learn more about their experience at St. Vincent's. Our compassionate staff members provide whatever family background information they can offer, along with support and reunion services. To learn more, call 312-655-7093. That's 312-655-7093. The spirit of St. Vincent's lives on in the inspiring stories that continue to emerge today.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Bob Gilligan of the Catholic Conference of Illinois, and let's bring it back home here to some of the issues we're working on during the final less than 3 weeks of the legislative session. It's hard to believe that the legislature will adjourn, in all likelihood, before what month are we in? May 31st. There's a goal of getting out on May 24th, but unlikely they'll meet that, but by sure, they'll be out on the 31st. So some of the issues that we've been following, just to give you an idea, some of the lesser profile issues we get involved with is there's legislation that would establish a grant program to certain not-for-profits for those to serve those people who are waiting trial. You may recall that the legislature passed the Pretrial Fairness Act, and so those are people who are no longer incarcerated. They're out and they're waiting their trial. But while awaiting their trial, obviously these individuals have a lot of needs, human service needs. So this program, this particular bill, would fund not-for-profits to help those people before they can get to their actual trial. So hopefully it'll help some people out, get them on the right path, and improve their lives. That's something that we're working on, concerned about. We are actually supporting the governor on his proposal to increase the child tax credit. That would give more money to individuals who are low income, who have children, increase it from what it currently is to, I think it's $300 a month or more than what they currently have. So we support that proposal, and that will probably be in the governor's budget as the legislature passes that. Some of the higher profile issues that we're dealing with, one of them that we were going to talk about today, but unfortunately we had a guest that was unable to come on, who had canceled. We're obviously still very involved with advocating against assisted suicide. That bill is Senate Bill 3499. The bill, as I had talked about earlier, has been assigned to a committee, but it has never been discussed to date, and it's likely not to be discussed before the legislature adjourns on May 31st. You never know, but we're watching it closely, and I'm sure over the summer we're going to have a lot more conversations about that particular piece of legislation. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about something the Catholic Conference has been very involved with, although it's not getting as much attention as it did in the fall and this time last year, is the scholarship tax credit. Believe it or not, we're still at it. We are in the process of introducing new legislation that would pretty much change the name of the program. It was called the Invest in Kids Act. we will be eliminating that title and creating a new program that is also a scholarship tax credit. It's called Enhancing Equity in Education, and that legislation is being drafted as we speak. When I leave here, we'll be reviewing it further in further details. In essence, it's still going to be a scholarship tax credit program. Individuals will be able to donate money. They will get a tax credit. That money will go into a pool of funds to fund scholarships so low-income children can attend a non-public school. The difference between what we're talking about now and what we had prior to the legislature not renewing the program is that this particular program will be focused more on low-income children. Right now, you can be eligible for the program if you earn 200% to 300% of the federal poverty level, which for a family of 4 can be $60,000 to $70,000. What we're going to try to do is focus the program on very poor kids, those families earning less than 185% of the federal poverty rate, and that would be about $30,000 for a family of 4. So they would be first eligible. This will increase the number of minority students, probably mostly African American students who would be eligible for the program. Currently, right now, 72% of all the applicants are in that category, being under 185% of the federal poverty rate. So what we're going to do is try to target it so more minority students can participate in the program, get that percentage up a little bit. That is one of the objections we were met with last year when we tried to to extend the program in the fall and in last year in the spring session. So hopefully more legislators will support it. So far, so good. When I left Springfield on Friday, we're getting a good response to that recommendation. And hopefully enough legislators will support it and we'll be able to renew the program. The percentage of the credit for the donor will not be the same. That will change. We're doing kind of a hybrid proposal that if our recommendation is that if you donate less than $10,000, it would be a dollar for dollar tax credit. So that would be better for a donor. And for those individuals who donate above the $10,000, they would be receiving a 65% tax credit, currently at 75%. But the difference is that the new program and the donor would be eligible for a federal deduction, which is a really complicated way of saying that they'll be able to also enjoy a federal benefit in addition to the state benefit. Will it work? We don't know. We're trying hard. Empower Illinois has been very involved with this proposal. We're not doing the broad, loud advocacy that we had in the past. This year, it's been more people like myself and other lobbyists working with members of the legislature to see what is it that they could support and what is it that they can't support. And hopefully that'll be more acceptable to the leadership and to the governor's office as well. So those are some of the programs that we're working on between now and May 31st. Keep us in your prayers. It's a very difficult time. It's a very stressful time for members of the Catholic Conference staff, members of Empower, and the lobbyists who are working on this. There's a lot going on down in Springfield, as you can imagine. You always hear about the last-minute deals that are cut. So we're hoping to be in one of those last-minute deals. That's what the strategy is. That's what the plan is. And hopefully it will work out. And by the time we do this program again on the third Monday in the month of June, we'll have good news. Maybe that the scholarship tax credit program has been reauthorized. So those are some of the major issues that we're dealing with here as we approach the end of May. We hope that you continue to follow the Catholic Conference on www.ilga.org. And on that website, when there's something imperative, we send out an email advocacy alert, and there it is on your screen now, and urging people to get involved. Let your voice be heard. And as you're going to see, there's a little bit of a landing page on assisted suicide and on the scholarship tax credit program. So with that, let's wind up our show in May. And thanks to our guests from SAM, Smart Alternatives to Marijuana, and from the Alliance Defending Freedom, talking about the EMTALA Act, and also the review of the legislation as we have it as of this moment. This is Bob Gilligan with the Catholic Conference. We'll be back on the third Monday in the month of June. Have a great month, everybody.